I'm Rachel Maddow. If you're just tuning in, we are following the breaking news that U.S. bombers carried out strikes today at 3 Iranian nuclear sites. One at Natanz, a site that had previously been hit by Israel. Israel and Iran have been trading strikes since Israel's surprise attack last Friday. Israel has already attacked the site at Natanz. Now the United States has done so as well. Another nuclear site near Isfahan in Iran, and also, according to the president, the facility called Fordo, which is a deeply buried facility. And that's important tactically because the U.S. military is believed to have essentially unique targeting capacity to hit a site like that. It is a deep underground facility. The United States has essentially developed weapons specifically to target facilities like, and so these B-2 bombers that have reportedly carried out these strikes tonight in Iran are aircraft with capacity that no other military in the world really has. Now, common wisdom about this president, about the political movement that he leads, is that he is supposedly isolationist, that he is supposedly anti-war. That has never been exactly right. That's always been kind of a lazy common wisdom. In less than 6 months back in office, he has threatened military action against Panama, against Canada, against Denmark in order to seize Greenland. He has bombed Yemen over and over and over again, and now he appears to have entered the United States military into a war in Iran, something that neoconservatives have thrilled to for, I guess, 2 generations now. A lot of commentary around the Trump phenomenon and Trump's politics would suggest that he has risen in opposition to the neoconservatives who have advocated for this type of war since essentially the Iranian Revolution in 1979. But since 1979, the U.S. military has not engaged directly with Iran. But Donald Trump has done so tonight. Donald Trump has ordered U.S. military bombing raids on Iran. We are now in war with Iran. President Trump announced the strikes on his niche social media platform, which is called Truth Social. He said in that post, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside Iran airspace. A full payload of," inexplicable all capital letters, "bombs." It's not an acronym. He's just spelling it in all capital letters. "A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the capital world that could have done this." And then he says in all capital letters, "Now is the time for peace!" Exclamation point. "Thank you for your attention to this matter." The president, in his quirky spelling and delivery, delivering the most sober possible message to the American people, who have been largely opposed to and afraid of a potential U.S. war with Iran, again, for generations. Donald Trump has now started it. We are expecting President Trump to address the nation just about an hour from now, talking about this decision. Well, of course, we'll bring you that live when it happens. Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba. Monica, thanks very much for being with us. I know this is crunch time.
I'm not going to lie, this is a crazy
What can you tell
place
us
to be
about
in,
this
Chad.
decision tonight and what we know about the potential scope of this military engagement?
Yeah, Rachel, good to be with you. Look, this is an incredibly consequential decision of a massive scale for any president, but of course, in particular, for this one who had been touting the fact that he was going to maybe give Iran as much as 2 weeks to see if a diplomatic solution could be possible. We knew that there were European leaders huddling with Iranian officials in Geneva as recently as yesterday. And he was even arguing from the tarmac when he was traveling yesterday and on Air Force One that perhaps that was a possibility. But he had been also very clear that it was likely that if he didn't get the terms of a deal that he was potentially pursuing here, that the U.S. military could get more involved. Now, he's going to lay out, I'm told, his rationale to the American people for this when he does speak at 10 p.m. And he is going to, of course, talk about what this means in this moment. I'm told by a senior White House official that as of right now, he and the country does not and should not expect additional strikes. Again, at this moment, this has obviously been unfolding in real time, can change incredibly quickly, but that is the posture.
Run that back.
Joining us now from Washington, D.C. is NBC News White House correspondent Monica.
How many have we launched?
Monica, thanks very much for being with us.
Way?
I know this is crunch time. What can you tell us about this decision tonight and what we know about the potential scope of this military engagement?
Yeah, Rachel, good to be with you. Look, this is an incredibly consequential decision of a massive scale for any president, but of course, in particular, for this one who had been touting the fact that he was going to maybe give Iran as much as 2 weeks to see if a diplomatic solution could be possible. We knew that there were European leaders huddling with Iranian officials in Geneva as recently as yesterday. And he was even arguing from the tarmac when he was traveling yesterday and on Air Force One that perhaps that was a possibility. But he had been also very clear that it was likely that if he didn't get the terms of a deal that he was potentially pursuing here, that the U.S. military could get more involved. Now, he's going to lay out, I'm told, his rationale to the American people for this when he does speak at 10 p.m. And he is going to, of course, talk about what this means in this moment. I'm told by a senior White House official that as of right now, he and the country does not and should not expect additional strikes. Again, at this moment, this has obviously been unfolding in real time, can change incredibly quickly, but that is the posture as of, again, this second. And we know that the president also just a couple of hours ago had a conversation with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. We know that this was a U.S. military operation that was heavily coordinated with Israel. They obviously were briefed on every step of the way. They knew this was happening. It was done, again, in a highly coordinated fashion, and that's not surprising. The president has been in touch with the prime minister pretty much every day over this last week or so when it comes to this conflict. And I can also tell you, Rachel, that he was traveling back from his property in Bedminster, New Jersey. He returned to Washington around 5:30 p.m. this evening, and he went to the Situation Room where he monitored much of this in real time, again, with some of his top national security advisors, and where we know that this is something that will be planned. It's going to continue to take place throughout the evening. We know that tomorrow he has another National Security Council meeting. And to the point that you started this show with about this question of the U.S. effectively being at war with Iran right now, this is a president that's going to need to come out and tell the American people why he made that decision, why this posture was one he felt was inevitable. And you're already seeing a lot of lawmakers and a bipartisan effort, we should point out, raising questions about this and using this kind of military authority without that congressional approval. We know there had been a resolution that had been in the works over the last couple of days to see if that could be put up for a vote next week that was anticipating this potentially. But again, this is President Trump's maybe perhaps most consequential decision of this second term. Of course, there were many in the first term, but this is also a person who we need to remind everybody as a candidate repeatedly campaigned on and against ending all foreign wars and not pushing the U.S. further into these kinds of military entanglements overseas. So I think there's a lot of questions tonight about his approach to all of this. But I can also tell you, Rachel, just from talking to my White House sources a short time ago, they're very pleased with the fact that this was able to be carried out covertly, that it didn't appear that anything leaked, and that they were able to do this and keep U.S. military and U.S. personnel who were involved as safe as possible throughout the evening for now. Rachel.
Monica, this is both a communications, White House communications question and also sort of a strategic question, which is that I know that I'm sure that the White House has seen the American public polling on this and knows that this is an unpopular move. The president has been so opaque, almost teasing in his remarks to reporters about how nobody knows what I'm going to do. The White House hasn't made an effort to try to publicly sell to the American people the necessity of a strike like this. They've done the strike now, and we don't know, again, if this will just be a one-off or this is the start of a longer engagement. Once you've bombed another country, you don't necessarily get a say as to how much war you end up with them in. Is there a sense at the White House that there is going to be, they meant to, they now plan to try to do more communication to the American people as to why this is necessary, why this is our war. The Secretary of State, for example, Marco Rubio, has argued essentially the opposite to the American people in very recent days.
Yeah, just as recently as about a week ago, when this conflict really began in earnest and all of the fire was being exchanged between Iran and Israel, that was the top line from many White House officials and senior aides, saying that this was something where the U.S. was assisting Israel in its defense as missiles and drones were coming in from Iran, but that it wouldn't go beyond that and that this was Israel's conflict to manage. So you're right to note that there was a shift in that pretty dramatically, and the president began to say that he was very concerned about Iran's ability to build and have a nuclear weapon, even contradicting several times his own director of national intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. In fact, just yesterday, flat out, he said she's wrong, referring to her testimony in March about...
Okay, I'll go ahead and say this, chat. I'll say this till I die. The thing that I like about Trump is how funny he makes being the president. My man can go on and talk shit to world leaders on Twitter. Bro, if Trump was not the president, it would not be as near as funny, involved, or like relatable to just the common people. Just because he's Trump. I don't know.
About her doubts that Iran was as close as the president believes Iran was to having a nuclear weapon, and days before he had said, I just don't think that she's right about that, and he dismissed her entirely. And then again yesterday he said, I don't even care what my entire intelligence community says. I believe that they were just very close to having that ability. So we are also seeing that split in the last couple of days that the president himself has talked about uniquely, but that the intel community is at odds with, which is really, really significant here. I think that Vice President J.D. Vance and a couple of other people who have been key to the president in this decision-making did start to lay the groundwork a couple of days ago for this rationale of potentially dropping bombs in Iran, saying that this is a president who will respond with great force if he feels there's any risk to American assets or personnel. And we know that that was a little bit of a factor in this, that the president completely was arguing in a lot of his meetings with national security advisors that he was worried that there could be exposure to or retaliation to U.S. military personnel or U.S. interests abroad and also at home.
What do you think is going to happen? If we launch missiles at a country, what do you think that country is going to do back? They're going to respond. If not on us personally, like if not sending an attack directly at the U.S. just because of how dangerous that is, then they'll respond by what they do to the Americans in their country. There's going to be a response, bro. You can't just do stuff and expect them not to do anything back. It's a bully.
And that was something that drove a little bit of this decision as well. But I think that you're going to now see also this major split in MAGA world play out in real time, with a lot of people in his base who were arguing quite publicly against this kind of military intervention from the U.S., and then some who were trying to back him up and say that this is a president who should be trusted for making these decisions, and trying to argue that he, if he did it, would be in the right authority to do so. But I think he keeps saying that his supporters will love him no matter what. But I think this is a real question for the base and those millions of supporters who do have differing views on this, Rachel.
NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joining us from Washington. Monica, thank you. I know it's going to be a long night. I really appreciate you being here with us.
That's insane, bro. That's literally insane. There's so much shit going on right now. Wait, Trump's addressing the nation live right now?
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history.
This is live, chat.
In Operation Rising Lion, Israel has done truly amazing things. But in tonight's action against Iran's nuclear facilities, America has been truly unsurpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. History will record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. His leadership today has created a pivot of history that can help lead the Middle East and beyond to a future of prosperity and peace. President Trump and I often say, peace through strength.
He looks happy to be here.
First comes strength, then comes peace. And tonight, President Trump and the United States acted with a lot of strength. President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. God bless America. God bless Israel. And may God bless our unshakable alliance, our unbreakable faith.
This dude sounds like the character in a Dark Souls game.
We're also garnering reaction as well from many world leaders, including there at the United Nations, the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, with this message. He says this: I'm gravely alarmed by the use of force by the United States against Iran today, saying this is a dangerous escalation in a region already on the edge and a direct threat to international peace and security rapidly get out of control, with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world. He says, I call on member states to de-escalate and to uphold their obligations under the UN Charter and other rules of international law. At this perilous hour, it is critical to avoid a spiral of chaos. There is no military solution. The only path forward is diplomacy. The only hope is peace. Coming there, the message from the United Nations. So I would imagine that come next week, the UN Security Council will convene, maybe on an emergency basis, to discuss this. It was a key focal point of our coverage on Friday. You heard from the Israeli ambassador. You heard from the Iranian ambassador there at the Security Council. In the meantime, speaking of New York City, remember, we're garnering reaction as well from local and state elected leaders here stateside. We're hearing from the NYPD. Take a look at this. They say this, that we're tracking the situation unfolding in Iran. Out of an abundance of caution, we're deploying additional resources to religious, cultural, and diplomatic sites across New York City and coordinating with our federal partners. We'll continue to monitor for any potential impact to New York City. Also, live picture there in Los Angeles, over the airport there at LAX. We are hearing from California Governor Gavin Newsom. Take a look at this. He says, following the president's action in Iran, California's State Threat Assessment Center is actively monitoring for any potential impacts in California. He says, while there are no specific or credible counter threats we are aware of at this time, we urge everyone to stay vigilant and to report anything they may see. So the message coming from California Governor Gavin Newsom, kind of a coast-to-coast reaction there. In the meantime, though, we do want to continue with so many of our experts, analysts, reporters who really cover this each and every day. It's their job, the Middle East, including my friend now there, political scientist at UCLA, Benjamin Rad. He joins me. Benjamin, good to see you here. You and I were speaking, I believe, on Friday. And
Why
now
do I feel like this guy's
your
representing me
initial
in court
reaction,
before?
how momentous of an occasion is this, not just for the United States, not just for kind of the Middle East? Is this a watershed moment? Would you characterize it as thus?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm still trying to catch my breath of the events of the last few hours. Iran, the Islamic Republic of Iran, since 1979 when it was conceived, has been a foil in the foreign policy objectives and in the stability of the Middle East for the United States and for other regional allies and global allies for a very long time now. And this is a monumental shift in what that dynamic is going to look like. If the United States is able to effectively dismantle or cripple Iran's nuclear enrichment capability, it sends in a very, very powerful message, and it undermines Iran's ability not only to threaten allies and others in the region, but to project that power beyond its borders through its proxy groups. The message has been sent loud and clear. And the question now is sort of not just whether these installations have been sufficiently set back, but whether or not Iran's own system of government is facing a crisis as it decides how it's going to respond. And it is not, and it does not have any good options in front of it.
So that shows where we
So
hit,
that's
right?
the
We hit
other
Fort
element here. Not only do we have the nuclear
Fort Allen.
component, which is huge, and it's been a problem since the 1990s, but now we also have a crisis of survival, of legitimacy of Iran's theocratic system.
So a lot of those questions, I would argue, maybe you agree with me, right now are extremely unanswerable. I'm going to ask them anyway because we're still so early into this. So that is the question now. What does Iran's nuclear program look like at this stage? Israel kind of set the preemptive stage for it, the entree to the strikes at so many of the nuclear facilities. And the United States kind of came up from the rear and helped them take out really the three crown jewels of the program itself: Fordo, Natanz, Isfahan here.
All right, so yeah,
So
that
what
is
is
where we
left?
hit.
Will we know? How will we
We
know?
hit Isfahan,
Will the
Fordo,
IAEA
and
tell
where,
us
Natanz?
that Iran no longer has the capability to enrich? Will Iran eventually, time will tell, start up a program again 10, 15, 20 years down the road? What is the capability right now? And even before the U.S. strikes, I had asked you, what damage Israel had done to it. Now the U.S., according to President Trump, finishing it off carte blanche completely. That seems to be the sense. But to my previous question, how will we know?
Yeah, and so the Iranian officials indicated on social media and in reports a few hours ago that they spent the last 7 days moving highly enriched uranium components and materials out of these facilities and into other secure areas. Now, again, they could be bluffing. We don't know if this is the case. But let's assume that Iran managed to get something out. Let's assume that and let's also go on the assumption that most of these facilities have been destroyed permanently, if not indefinitely. What remains is Iran's know-how, is the knowledge that its chief nuclear scientists possess, those who are still alive, and there's probably a good number that are alive. They still have the knowledge and the know-how to recreate or replicate the work they've done. They just now need facilities to do it. So to know effectively what's happened to Iran's nuclear weapons program requires either the IAEA getting access to the existing facilities without any restrictions. That's one option. The other option is to basically have Iran say, okay, we hear this now. We are willing to abandon nuclear enrichment as a whole, or to outsource it to other countries, which was the deal that the United States had offered earlier this month that was rejected. Or Iran could step on the gas and say, you know what, not only are we not going to stop enriching, we're going to accelerate, and we're going to withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, because under that treaty, we have the rights to do so for energy purposes, and the United States violated international law by denying us that right. So there's multiple options. We simply don't know which path they will choose, because that's all part of this escalation ladder, which is the metaphor that's being used.
Let's put up the map again here. Jennifer Griffin has, I think, some really great reporting. It's kind of niche. It gets into the weeds, and you can help us kind of elucidate it. She says, I'm told by experts that the underground tunnel at Isfahan is a much harder target than Fordow, and it's not clear whether the Tomahawks were able to destroy it. A source says to her, there's no way they got in that tunnel. It's deeper than the calm.
So they died,
harder
pretty
rock,
much is what he's saying.
according to a well-placed.
They're dead.
She reports IAEA inspectors reported multiple times it was used for storage of UF6. Now, UF6 was one of the large precursor materials to make enriched uranium, but there was no enrichment going on inside of that mountain. She said it's important that the UF6, which is uranium hexafluoride, be accounted for and eventually removed. Isfahan is where Iran also manufactured centrifuges. So could it be that Isfahan was actually more important than Fordow?
So it appears that what was happening in Isfahan was that you were having the enrichment done at the secret facility in Fordo, where the most advanced centrifuges were developed or were running. And then that material was taken out of Fordo and being stored in Isfahan. So you have production in Fordo, you have storage and maintenance and possibly conversion to, putting onto a warhead, that type of development happening in Isfahan. So two different facilities doing two different things. Now, whether or not you can destroy Isfahan, one can with the proper munitions, basically cripple access to it. So maybe the facility still stands, maybe the tunnels, maybe bunkers, maybe a huge size, depots, maybe halls, whatever facilities are still intact. But access to them, which requires, a tunnel entrance above ground, those can be crippled. Those can be eliminated or denied or compromised. You can re-access them, you can rebuild them. But there'll be satellites watching all of this happen to see if there's any more activity there. So again, we don't know for certain until we have either visual satellite intelligence or on-the-ground human intelligence verifying one way or the other. This is all speculation.
So obviously, within 2 weeks didn't mean a full 2 weeks. It meant within 2 days. So I thought that was somewhat telling and prescient, since we were talking about, kind of parsing the language of, what did the president mean saying he needed 2 weeks' time to think? Remember, the Wall Street Journal earlier this week had reported that he had already made up his mind, and he was off to Bedminster, New Jersey yesterday, came back to the Situation Room just today, and we have some pictures put out by the White House here. Benjamin, just lastly, I wanted to ask, was Iran caught off guard? Or did they know or think that this was coming? Were they completely surprised?
Nothing indicated that they were prepared for this. We didn't see any massive movements. We didn't, at least nothing we were able to detect. There's no intelligence that came out that said Iran was prepping for this. And I think very much they were caught off guard. I think they were willing to accept that maybe not 2 weeks, but it definitely would last for longer than 2 days. We know that there were attempts at diplomacy with the Europeans, and reports came out that even Turkey had offered to help. Maybe they were waiting to see where that was going to go. It was going to be revisited. So I think that this very quick 48 hours came as a shock to them.
All right, Benjamin Rabb there, as always, came enough. I guess I have to ask this. I know I always say lastly, but I always think of another question. What are you looking for going into the week now? Will there be retaliation? That's what I'm looking for, and I would imagine Americans are probably asking themselves the same thing here. It was also reported in Axios yesterday, I believe, that there was some type of brokering, at least attempted, with Turkey as an intermediary between the United States and Iran. It was reported President Trump was thinking that he wanted to meet directly with Iranian officials, but the Ayatollah could not be reached. Erdogan of Turkey was kind of brokering all of this. And then, all for naught, it didn't go anywhere here. Can you envision some type of meeting or summit between U.S. officials, high-ranking, not Steve Witkoff, but Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, President himself, with Iranian officials? Is that on the table, you think, or no, after this?
So if it's one thing that officials of any high rank, especially president or cabinet level secretary, doesn't want to do is he or she doesn't want to engage in a meeting or a summit where they know ahead of time a deal is unlikely. It looks bad for them. And so in this instance, we know where Iran's red lines were. They haven't signaled otherwise. Their red lines have been, they insist on maintaining a peaceful enrichment program. And that they were not going to compromise on. Unless they indicated through back channels they were willing to give.
We get it, yeah. There's some crazy stuff going on with that. I still need to see the day laborers at the Home Depot. That's something I wanted to watch. With the ice raids.
Outside at least 2 Home Depot locations, one in Sylmar and another here in Hollywood.
KTLA 5's Karine Winter joining us now live from the Hollywood location with this breaking story. Karine?
Well, according to officials, according to witnesses, they say officials who they described as ICE agents arrived at this Home Depot this morning and rounded up more than a dozen people. We're outside of that Home Depot. I just want to show you that gentleman over there in the turquoise shirt. He's one of the family members of those who was taken, arrived here. He's been very emotional talking to the media. His wife apparently is a food vendor who's out here every single day. And again, she was rounded up as part of the raid. But take a look at what went down hours ago here in Hollywood.
Dang, it took his man's wife?
Corre!
And this is a location along Sunset and Western Avenue. There's cell phone video that you just saw. It captured the raids occurring at this Home Depot property. Also, a few blocks away near Home Depot. This is all part of the crackdown we've seen this week and in recent weeks. President Trump's immigration enforcement efforts to detain those suspected of being in the U.S. illegally for possible deportation. Actions that have polarized communities here in the Southland and across the nation, with some arguing that these workers are trying to earn a living and are law-abiding people who are living here. Others saying many undocumented individuals who have been detained have criminal records, and that the ones who still don't belong in this country given the Trump administration's mandate. Listen to what this witness told us. He provided KTLA with some of the cell phone video that you've been seeing. He wanted to remain anonymous.
Several people were running upwards Wilton's Place. I informed them that ICE agents were around the area. They were aware of that, and then that's when an SUV pulled up, came out. 2 agents tackled down a individual with no questions. They placed his face into the dirt, physically apprehended him.
Jeez, bro.
And we reached out to officials for more details on today's raid. They said while they can't comment on every single operation, these raids continue on a daily basis, and that today's raid was routine federal immigration law enforcement operation. That's how they categorized it. But take a look at this statement. They're also advising the public to avoid assaulting and obstructing, interfering, impeding, or intimidating federal agents while conducting their immigration law enforcement duties, underscoring that anyone, U.S. citizen or not, can be arrested and face felony charges. I want to bring in now quickly Shobana Castillo. You're out here. We've been seeing the gentleman who's been very emotional. His wife was detained. He has no idea where she was taken. But you said some of the people detained today were also your neighbors.
That's right. My neighbors unfortunately got taken. They are not bad people. They are not criminals. They are hard workers. They came here for a better life because that's what the United States is about, right? You have freedom. You come here for a better life because unfortunately you run from countries, your own home. That's not the best, right? You come here looking for a better life. You come here for sanctuary. You come here to think that you're going to make it out here. But unfortunately, with these people coming and taking our own people, the people that constructed California, the people that work for California, the people who do a lot for us, right? They're taking them. What are you going to do when we're not here? What are you going to do when you have nobody left to work with?
And the woman you mentioned who was taken, she's pregnant?
She's actually pregnant. That's the saddest part. She's pregnant. She must have been scared. You don't know if this is going to cause you stress to her baby. You don't know if she might lose the baby from the shock.
Quick question, and I don't mean to come across as insensitive, but this is part of the Trump administration's mandate. President making it clear that anyone who's here, who's not here legally, that this is going to be a part of the process, as inhumane as many may categorize it. There is another argument to that.
I feel like it's wrong. Like I said, they're saying that they're going to take everybody, but why everybody when you have actual criminals that were born here and who have done way worse stuff, and yet they don't get the same punishment we're getting? Why is that? I want an answer to that, seriously. Why is it that criminals can get away with so much who are born here, criminals, and yet our people are innocent? They're working hard. They're doing stuff to make it out here, right?
Thank you.
Of course.
The argument, you can see it's so broad, so far-reaching. We'll have so much more on this coming up throughout the day on the KTLA 5 News. For now, we'll send it back to you in the studio.
Let's see if we can't get any bombing footage. Nah. I need to see some Iran bomb footage. Okay, do we actually have some? No way. There's no way we have footage of this. There's absolutely no way.
Welcome back. Israel continues to hammer Iranian nuclear sites to disable the country's atomic capabilities. So far, it's launched dozens of strikes on these facilities you see in the northern and north-central parts of the country. It includes the one that is most concerning to everyone, Fordo. That site is buried deep in a mountain, about 300 feet below ground, some 60 miles outside Tehran. Taking out that facility will require a much bigger bomb than Israel has in its arsenal. The president's considering deploying a U.S. bunker buster bomb. It is capable of penetrating 200 feet underground before detonation. Chief National Security Correspondent Jennifer Griffin explains. Hey, Jen.
Hi, Jackie. Well, we've just learned that the USS Nimitz, the aircraft carrier strike group, will be arriving in the Middle East this weekend. That's significant in terms of any potential strike on Fordo, because on board are not only dozens of warplanes and up to 5,000 sailors, but also the very important EF-18 Growler electronic warplanes that are needed if you were to fly the B-2s over Iran. Now, here at the Pentagon, there is little doubt whether the GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, or MOP, could destroy Iran's Fordo nuclear facility, buried, as you said, 300 feet under a mountain complex with layers of limestone and dolomite rock, which geologists call nature's own bomb shelter. Shown here during a test in 2018 and developed by the Air Force specifically to address Iran and North Korea's underground nuclear sites, the MOP was designed to penetrate 200 feet underground. Further, if two missiles are dropped via GPS positioning into the same hole.
Does it have the capacity, if it's employed the correct way, to have the effect inside the mission space? Absolutely.
Retired Navy Captain Todd Sawhill oversaw the Defense Department's targeting operations, advising 5 CENTCOM commanders and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs on weapons like the MOP.
You can use a multiple hit scenario so that you have multiple impacts in the same point. You'll create a large crater, spoil will be thrown out, and it allows a pathway for the next munition to go in even deeper and farther, so that successive hits on the same point will allow increased penetration and increased lethality.
All eyes now on Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, home to the B-2 stealth bomber. The U.S. is the only military in the world with the capability to strike this buried program with a conventional weapon using its B-2 bombers, which can fly at 50,000 feet, carrying 2 massive 30,000-pound bunker buster bombs. There are 2 entrances to Fordo.
If they wanted to go after the portal entrances, it's likely that they would use 2 B-2s for each portal entrance, so it could drop 2 bombs per portal.
The B-2s fly with a significant air escort for protection. It's a 30-hour round trip to the Mideast from Whiteman that requires a massive air refueling bridge. That is why the Pentagon ordered dozens of refuelers to bases in the UK and the Middle East. Lieutenant General Mark Wetherington is a former B-2 pilot and served as deputy commander of the Air Force Global Strike Command.
There'll be dozens of tanker aircraft supporting it. There'll be electronic attack and command and control missions and all sorts of support to this type of a mission. And so it's a very complex mission.
The mission, General Wetherington says, will rely on the quality of the intelligence about the Fordo site. Jackie?
Jennifer Griffin, thank you. Appreciate it. Well, some opinion pieces highlight the potentially historic choices the president faces in his decision-making. The New York Post editorial board with "Keep the focus on stopping Iran's nukes. Regime change is too risky a game." And Karl Rove writes in the Wall Street Journal, "Trump's clarity on Iran and the questions that remain, he hasn't wavered in his view that Tehran can't have nuclear weapons. Now he'll have to decide what to do about it." Michael Allen is a former special assistant to the president and senior national security director under President George W. Bush. Michael, thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So you just heard Jennifer Griffin's report, and it sounded to me like the assets that are moving in that direction would allow the president, if he so chooses, to take some kind of an action within the next week or so, even though the White House has said that he'll make a decision on whether to strike in the next 2 weeks. What do you see happening here? Do you think there's really a chance for diplomacy?
I think the president wants to leave the door ajar for diplomacy. I think he would like nothing more than for the Iranians to just sort of cry uncle and understand that they may be risking the health and security of their regime if this continues and if the United States were to intervene. However, in the end, I think Donald Trump will be worried about some sort of onerous verification process that may result if there is a diplomatic deal, because the Iranians have such a history of obscuring what they're up to, diverting nuclear material. Don't forget, Fordow and Natanz in the past were secret facilities that they did not declare. So there's a lot of baggage associated with trying to trust the Iranians. We still want a diplomatic solution, but at the end of the day, because we're already in the middle of a military conflict, it may be just that the best option is to go ahead and strike Fordow.
All of their defiant rhetoric, too, about never surrendering, I'm sure gives some people some questions. But meantime, the former Secretary of State for the president in his first term, Mike Pompeo, titled his new op-ed, "Israel is doing the world a favor. Now the U.S. must give any help necessary to end Iran's nuclear threat." And this morning, he added this.
It is time to put this to rest, to get all of the enrichment out of Iran, to finally put Israel in a place where it can be secure, and most importantly for the American people, to make sure that we are safe and we don't have to live under the threat of a nuclear-armed Iranian regime that has for years talked about death to our nation and done everything it can to facilitate that.
So let's say he does choose to strike Fordow. What happens next? What else does the U.S. have to be ready to support?
So I think that The Iranians will definitely strike us back. They will attempt to hit our bases in the region with short-range ballistic missiles. I think we would become even more than we already are in the crosshairs of their terrorist infrastructure. So I know that the president is weighing this in terms of a cost-benefit analysis. There's a reason why we've sent so much personnel, so many planes to the region, not just to support the B-2, but also to help shoot down any projectiles that the Iranians may send at Americans in the region. So the question really is, there will be blowback, but can we mitigate it? Can we do well enough by setting the theater with enough defensive weaponry as to sort of make the Iranians pause and think to themselves, if we hit the United States, or at least try to, we're just inviting even a greater series of airstrikes from the United States.
Obviously, there's concern about U.S. assets that are in the region, but there's also the question of if anything could happen here in the homeland. We had this comment from a former White House chief information officer and current CEO of a cybersecurity firm. Listen here.
If they are running out of weaponry and missiles, they could resort to cyber incidents and cyber attacks. Everything from everyday citizens to U.S. elected officials, media outlets, as well as critical infrastructure. They're going to look for something that might be high impact. Look at the control systems for energy, utilities, water, cyber vandalism, distributed denial of service attacks, sending tons and tons of internet traffic to websites, whether it's government agencies, media, or critical infrastructure such as financial services.
Should the federal government be doing anything right now to maybe guard against that, communicate that risk to public or private entities?
Definitely. And the National Security Agency, not just the electronic eavesdroppers for the country, but the ones that run Cyber Command, also have a mission to defend forward. They're allowed to get on foreign intelligence networks, be it telephonic or the like, and try and ensure that there are no attacks that head our way and or land here in the United States. The Iranians may be able to get through, so we do need to be vigilant in terms of our cyber defenses, but we're not powerless when it comes to trying to neuter these attacks before or at least during the Iranian attempt to hit us.
All right. It is a tense time, high stakes. Thank you so much for your expertise as always, Michael Allen. Appreciate it.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.
Fordo was designed.
This is what I want to see.
Thank you very much. A short time ago, the U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. For 40 years, Iran has been saying death to America, death to Israel. They have been killing our people, blowing off their arms, blowing off their legs with roadside bombs. That was their specialty. We lost over 1,000 people and hundreds of thousands throughout the Middle East and around the world have died as a direct result of their hate. In particular, so many were killed by their general, Qasem Soleimani. I decided a long time ago that I would not let this happen. It will not continue. I want to thank and congratulate Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. We worked as a team like perhaps no team has ever worked before. And we've gone a long way to erasing this horrible threat to Israel. I want to thank the Israeli military for the wonderful job they've done. And most importantly, I want to congratulate the great American patriots who flew those magnificent machines tonight, and all of the United States military on an operation the likes of which the world has not seen in many, many decades. Hopefully, we will no longer need their services in this capacity. I hope that's so. I also want to congratulate the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Raisin-Kane, spectacular general, and all of the brilliant military minds involved in this attack. With all of that being said, this cannot continue. There will be either peace or there will be tragedy for Iran far greater than we have witnessed over the last 8 days. Remember, there are many targets left. Tonight's was the most difficult of them all, by far, and perhaps the most lethal. But if peace does not come quickly, we will go after those other targets with precision, speed, and skill. Most of them can be taken out in a matter of minutes. There's no military in the world that could have done what we did tonight, not even close. There has never been a military that could do what took place just a little while ago. Tomorrow, General Kane, Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth will have a press conference at 8 a.m. at the Pentagon. And I want to just thank everybody, and in particular, God. I want to just say we love you, God, and we love our great military. Protect them. God bless the Middle East. God bless Israel, and God bless America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Is that all he said? No way. Is that all he said for real? That is hilarious. Yeah, that was the whole stream. That was his whole message. It took them an hour for that to come. That's crazy. He's such a meme, dude. It's so funny.
Let me bring in my colleague, Vaughn Hilliard, who's at the White House for us. Vaughn, what can you fill in for us about how the day unfolded?
Nicole, there's a lot of unanswered questions. It was just 24 hours ago that I was on a tarmac in New Jersey outside of his Bedminster Golf Club when I asked the president very explicitly whether the U.S. had intelligence that Iran was actively building a nuclear weapon. And he told me that his intelligence community and Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, who notably you did not see standing behind him there at the White House delivering these remarks, that their assessments that Iran was not building a nuclear weapon, that at least the U.S. had no intelligence of that, was, quote, wrong. I asked him whether he believed that Israel would be able to take out these nuclear facilities on its own, like Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu repeated 2 different times over the last 48 hours, and he undercut that assessment from the Israeli Prime Minister, suggesting that the U.S. was the only one that had the capacity to effectively, especially in the case of Fordo, which has this underground nuclear facility a half a mile under the ground, be able to adequately drop a bomb that would be able to take out this nuclear facility. And while he opened the door to this idea of 2 weeks, he never said that he was going to give 2 weeks to Iran to come back to the negotiating table over a potential nuclear agreement, notably one that he and his first administration pulled out back in 2018. But here today, in striking fashion, deciding to use the U.S. military in an offensive fashion within Iran, despite just 24 hours ago, again, the Iranian foreign minister, in an interview with our colleague Andrea Mitchell, making it clear that Iran was still interested in negotiating a potential deal where they would be able to enrich a certain level of uranium. Clearly, the president, after 2 months of negotiations, dismissing those overtures and deciding to move forward with these airstrikes, Nicole.
Vaughn, let me ask you if you have any reporting that explains what he is referring to when the president says if peace doesn't come quickly, then, I mean, he seems to be threatening further, is it further American involvement in attacks on Iran, or is that something the White House might describe as, I don't know, part of his deal making? What do we know what the further threat is to Iran?
The president has said that boots on the ground would be a last resort, that is not his plan. He noted tonight that there are no exact plans of further aggression inside of Iran, that these were the end of the initial airstrikes. It's now up to Iran to come to, again, a nuclear negotiating table here. But for the president here, I think that this is worth noting that we've had a conversation over this idea of a 2-week timeline, right? It was 3 weeks ago that he suggested there would be consequences for Russia if it didn't agree to a ceasefire agreement or a peace deal with Ukraine. And that deadline came and went. Of course, the president in his first administration threatened to strike and blow up North Korea. He has threatened repeatedly to strike and blow up Iran. And this here, I think, is notable because these are the most significant offensive strikes we have seen the president move forward with since he killed Iranian military general Soleimani back in 2020. I think it's important for folks to remember in retaliation, which Iran has threatened to do this time around, Iran launched air strikes at a U.S. air base in Iraq, and more than 100 service personnel ultimately walked away with traumatic brain injuries. And there is still that looming threat here of how Iran is going to potentially retaliate against the U.S. The president making clear that they should not, and that he is prepared and equipped to use the U.S. military again to further activate troops in an offensive manner within Iran.
Vaughn, stick around for us. I want to bring into our coverage NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley. We heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before we heard from Donald Trump. What did he have to say?
Yeah, well, Nicole, I mean, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu couldn't have been more pleased with President Trump. His very brief remarks in English were filled with superlatives and just in a palpable sense of joy at what President Trump had done. And it was actually extraordinary to see just how grateful Prime Minister Netanyahu was in such a public way. He said, America has been truly surpassed. It has done what no other country on earth could do. He said that President Trump in the United States acted with a lot of strength. He said, President Trump, I thank you. The people of Israel thank you. The forces of civilization thank you. And then he did God bless America, God bless Israel. It was very much just a totally dedicated speech to praising the president. And this is very interesting because remember, Nicole, just a couple of months ago, it looked as though President Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu were kind of on the outs. President Trump was negotiating with Iran, something that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has constantly said he doesn't want to see negotiations with Iran. The president made a very high-profile visit to the Middle East and didn't visit Israel, America's top ally in the Middle East, one of its top allies in the world. So it looked as though the president and Netanyahu weren't going to be the best friends that everybody had imagined during the Biden years, when it looked as though Biden was very much falling out with Netanyahu. Now, President Trump seems to have sort of tethered himself, not just to Netanyahu, but to his adventures throughout the entire Middle East, and that could become very, very dangerous. You know, President Trump did mention Qasem Soleimani in that speech. Qasem Soleimani was the head of the Quds Force, who President Trump had assassinated back in 2020. Much of the defense and security and intelligence establishment were telling President Trump that this is going to be a bad idea, that there's going to be blowback, that the Iranians will attack America. Well, they didn't really. There wasn't really that much blowback. A previous strike that the U.S. did against the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria back in 2017, under President Trump's direction, that also didn't have the same kind of blowback that a lot of people were worried about. It's quite likely that President Trump remembered all of those warnings and how they didn't come true. He may believe that he can stroll into the ring, make a few quick punches, and walk out a champ. And it's unclear whether or not that's going to happen because Benjamin Netanyahu is going to be, on some level, held to the notion that if you break it, if you break it, you buy it, basically. This is what happened to the U.S. in Iraq, the invasion and the toppling of the Saddam Hussein regime that caused so much instability, not just in Iraq, but in neighboring countries as well, for decades. Now you're going to be seeing something like this in Iran, as we hear the conversation here in Israel among the top-level politicians increasingly has shifted from destroying Iran's nuclear program to affecting regime change in Iran, which we, as Americans, know that that is a very troubling concept of regime change. It's been very frustrating for previous U.S. presidents before President Trump. But with this mentality now, if President Trump believes that he can just walk away from this situation, that's quite possible. But we have to see what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, whose very warm words for the president today, must have cheered President Trump. We'll have to see what Netanyahu decides to do next.
Matt, did Prime Minister Netanyahu convey any surprise, or did it seem obvious and preordained that Donald Trump would do what he did tonight?
I would say it didn't look as though he was expressing surprise, but it came very, very quickly after the president's strikes. And I would say that Prime Minister Netanyahu's body language was, again, as I said, palpably almost excited. He almost seemed to be jumping up and down. It was that pleased. And again, Prime Minister Netanyahu has made a big point of telling the Israeli public that he and only he can extract or wring out concessions from Washington. He makes it very clear that through successive presidents and leaders in the United States, that Netanyahu is the man for getting the United States to do what Israel wants. He's made this very public, and a lot of Israelis that I talk to believe this. There was this expectation that the president would weigh in with Israel. Driving down the highway the other day, I saw a bunch of big highway signs, big billboards saying, "Finish the job, Mr. President," with a big American flag and a picture of President Trump. This is something that people are putting on billboards. And it was very much a strong feeling that the president should weigh in to help Israel. And this is what we heard from Benjamin Netanyahu tonight. There was gratitude, there was excitement, there was a sense of relief for the prime minister, who definitely instigated this war with Iran and now could be held accountable if he doesn't succeed in his stated goals. But there was also this sense that the prime minister really did feel as though he might owe something to President Trump. You could tell that the gratitude was so deep. And again, this is something that's going to vindicate Netanyahu in front of the Israeli public, as he has been increasingly blamed for the failures of October 7th. Now, with this latest adventure into Iran, it looks as though Prime Minister Netanyahu can turn to the Israeli public and say, I have done what everybody said was a terrible idea for generations. The United States government has regularly been telling Netanyahu, who, by the way, has been pushing for destroying Iran's nuclear program since the early 1990s, the U.S. and other leaders have always been telling them, don't do it. Step away from the brink. Don't attack Iran. Well, Israel did, and over the past week, its military dominance in Iran has been unquestionable. It is almost, again, when you talk to Israeli officials, they're extremely and visibly pleased with how well this attack on Iran has done. It has a popularity rate here in Israel, according to a most recent poll, of over 80% among Jewish Israelis. So this was a very popular move, and bringing President Trump on board is going to carry huge rewards for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But President Trump and his followers are going to have to ask, and they're already asking, what are the rewards for the United States?
Matt Bradley, incredible reporting. Thank you so much. Stay close to the camera. We're great.
Can we get some actual bombing footage? There was some that I saw the other day, but I can't remember how. I'm not trying to see the U.S. Yeah, Tel Aviv. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. That's crazy. That looks crazy, guys. footage from the attack. Look at the clusters on that. The clusters are actually insane. Jeez, bro. Alright. So here's what we're going to do, guys. We're going to go ahead and end stream for a little bit. We've taken a lot of information in that hour. That was our breaking news update. If anything happens, I will, hop back on. You guys know what's up.